Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Sports Exchange. My name is Scott Morgan-Roth, the Motor City Madmouth, along with my original Sports Exchange co-host, George Eichorn. Welcome back to our show, George.
Thank you, Scott. Good to be here. Nice to be reunited with you once again, my friend.
Yeah, I don't sing well, but reunited, and it feels so good. All right, that's as close as I'm going to get without the old Memorex glass break in here, and hopefully I don't break a window along the lines where we're at. There are no windows anyways. And we welcome a special guest tonight to our broadcast, George, Mike Brown. And Mike Brown obviously has written a book called The Umpire's Bunkhouse. So with that said, okay, Mike, welcome to the broadcast.
Hey, welcome. It's great to be here, and I'm glad to talk sports with you guys.
Well, we're glad to have you. A nice little storyline with Mike and George as they overlapped during the 1980 Winter Olympics in Lake Placid. So why don't you guys talk about the fact that you overlapped with such a historic sports time?
Yeah, sure, Scott. Thank you. I was fortunate enough with my then girlfriend and my future wife to go into the lottery for 1980 Olympic Games in Lake Placid, and ended up with those tickets, two tickets, I should say, one for each of us, to the game in which the Team USA defeated the Soviet Union, referred to as the Miracle on Ice, and we went as spectators, but I was able to also phone in game reports live to you and to host Ron Cameron at WXYZ Radio in Detroit during his sports talk show. And you got to remember that those very unwise sports people at ABC and the affiliate in Detroit was Channel 7. They decided not to televise the USA-Russia Soviet Union game live. So the only way we could get the reports out to the people in metropolitan Detroit was through the radio and to give updates, and that's what I did when you and Henry were producing the radio show that night on WXYZ Radio, Scott. So that was the game I was at. Mike, you were at one that was even just as or more famous for the USA.
Well, it was a special time in Lake Placid. I was assigned by the Ottaway newspaper group. It's a group of about 24 papers in Pennsylvania, New York, throughout the New England states, and it was extremely exciting. I was a young guy. I was a sports editor of a paper at Oneonta, New York, which is a good sports town. And here's something that I wrote that I think would be timely. I wrote this in 1980. Whether they paid $30 or $150 before Sunday's game at the Olympic Center, spectators roared out of Lake Placid Fieldhouse, thinking it was worth every penny spent. The United States Olympic hockey team had just provided one of the special and magic moments in sports that only comes along on rare and unexpected times. And it was unexpected.
Yeah, like I said, I remember being on that sports talk with Ron Cameron, and Henry Jones was my assistant. And, it was definitely neat, George bringing you on a few times, because it was a developing story, which obviously turned out to be quite historic when the U.S. indeed defeated the Soviet Union.
Yeah, it was 40 years ago.
Yeah, Mike's game when he saw the gold medal award to Team USA. And as a side note, me and my girl were on our way up to Montreal after we saw the USA defeat the Soviet Union on that Friday game. We went to see the Red Wings play Montreal the very next night, Saturday night, at the Forum, and I had a chance to meet one of my idols, and yours too, Scott, Danny Gallivan of Hockey Night in Canada.
Yeah, I never made it to Montreal. I wish I would have. I've been to Vancouver. I've been to Toronto, but never made it to Montreal. It's a bucket list item one of these days. I hope to get up there with the Red Wings.
Sure.
They've always been great. Kyle and Todd do a great job, so I'm definitely glad to be a part of that. So let's talk a little bit about, I got to tell you, when you write a book on umpires, once upon a time when I was growing up, I was a catcher. And I'll tell you what, I enjoyed the position because it kept me engaged. And I used to like to manipulate the umpires a little bit, frame pitches, get in their heads a little bit. You kind of miss this one, the old psychology. And throughout the years in the media, I've always enjoyed interviewing catchers and have interviewed my fair share. So with that said, okay, put yourself, Mike, in the umpire's position, and I'm in the catcher. How much manipulation or communication was there between umpires and catcher? And, I love framing pitches. I love the psychology. But tell me what the relationship was between the catcher and yourself being the umpire.
Well, I can say unequivocally, every game, if you don't have good communication with your catcher, you're in trouble. They're protecting you from getting hit by 90-mile-an-hour fastballs, for one thing. And secondly, they're going to let you know if you miss one. And they don't have to say anything. They can shrug their shoulders and they can hold their glove a little bit longer. So it's really a good relationship. And a lot of it, for me, comes back to being a sports writer in the past. I saw a lot of good umpiring, and I saw an occasional bad job. But by and large, the testing and the training it goes into Ohio umpiring, at least, is very, very good. And so when I went to Cooperstown as an umpire, I brought a notebook, and I told everybody I was going to write a book about this and various stories. And it's sort of humorous, but also serious. A guy from Florida, Jacksonville, Kevin Boyce is his name. He's really funny. He told a story about he's this big guy. He's 6'4", 235. He crouched down to call the strikes, and all of a sudden the catcher discharged something. I won't say what it is on the but you can guess what it is. And he said, "I think I should." He broke off his language. He said, "I think I should brush off the plate." And you can imagine, and everybody started laughing. So that kind of stuff goes on every single game, and it's fun. It's so much fun.
All right, now, obviously, Mike, you lived in Cooperstown 40 years ago, back in 1980. What was it like living in Cooperstown, a place that's gotten a lot of my money with some of my statues and memorabilia? That's an expensive place, but I'll tell you, a beautiful place up in Cooperstown. What was it like living there?
Well, it's very small. Most people in Florida can't imagine. It has one stoplight. It's you can drive through it in about 10 minutes, but it has 400,000 people during the summertime. Now, this summer, it's different. They have COVID-19, and everything is closed down right now. They're just starting to reopen. The park where the tournaments are closed down completely. But the park itself is beautiful. The mountains around there. Cooperstown is about 16 miles from Oneonta, which is another beautiful city. And that's where I was living in 1980. I was sports editor of the Daily Star. And it was a great exposure for me. In 1980 was the first year that I covered the Baseball Hall of Fame. And you Detroit fans will love this. Al Kaline, Bill Freehand, all the boys. But even more than the guys introduced as new members were the old members like Cool Papa Bell, Warren Spahn, Bob Gibson, Henry Aaron. Every year, it was just a great time and the best time of my life covering Hall of Fame.
Well, I got to tell you, once upon a time, I believe the Oneonta area had the Tigers, didn't they? Oneonta Tigers in the New York Penn League?
While they were Yankees for about 12 years. One of the great stories of the Yankees covering them, 1982, the best right fielder in the history of professional baseball. And that's a trick question. I said professional baseball, and it was John Elway. Remember that name?
Yeah, I remember. In fact, it's funny how you bring Elway up, because I was in Fort Lauderdale the same time you were. Obviously never met you back then, but John Elway used to play, the minor league facility for him was down over in Hollywood. But, but he was leveraging the Yankees to work his way out of Baltimore, and obviously it worked because he ended up landing with the Denver Broncos. But know it all too well. But back then the Yankees had to divide their time out in Hollywood and Fort Lauderdale. But yeah, John Elway. A lot of people don't realize that he spent time with the New York Yankees. Not a bad gig if you can get to it, for sure.
Back in 1982, $160,000 for two months of play was not bad.
No.
My umpiring career, this is George, lasted about 2 games, Mike. So it was Mr. Caramagno, a man who I admired growing up from my church. He started his own little rec league, if you will, of guys and gals playing baseball. Well, the guys needed some umpires, so me and a fellow named Tom Novak, a friend of mine that went to grade school with me in Detroit, we asked Mr. Caramagno, could we be your umpires? And he said, well, come and watch a couple of games and see how I do it. He was an umpire himself. And so we were so excited. And he said, but you got to remember, guys, you got to wear a white shirt and you got to wear black slacks. So, I mean, he was, even though we were only like about 16 or 17 years old, he insisted that we dressed like we were umpiring in the big league. So it's kind of cool. We did a couple of games, Tom and I, and but I don't know. We just didn't catch on as far as what's actually needed, to be a good umpire. I guess it wasn't in my blood. However, I say that because later on I got a deep appreciation for the umpiring business because of a friend of ours that Scott and I know named Ron Cameron, a sportscaster in Detroit. And Ron is a former minor league umpire, never made it to the Big East, but he's a minor league umpire. And so he was totally pro umpire. Remember, Scott, when people would call in, if you dare bring up a question on his talk show about a call that was blown, oh my gosh, Ron would explode. And but all that being said, I got an appreciation for the umpires back then. I got a chance to meet in person guys like Joe Brinkman and Richie Garcia and Rick Reed. And, I got an appreciation for that fine professional umpire American National League games that they do, the association. And really, I mean, I applaud you. It sounds like a great book. I can't wait to read it.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Well,
it's amazing, too.
It's the training it's involved is in Ohio and everywhere. It's incredible, but it's a difficult thing because not everybody wants to do it. In the last few years, there's been tremendous animosity and, fans just yelling out anything they want to say. And the other thing is obviously the payment. Ohio is only paying $55 for varsity baseball games. And yet, if you did a game in Cooperstown High School, you would get $107.
Wow.
So you can see that there's a disparity there. So that's something to be concerned of. And then the equipment is very, very expensive. I have probably $2,000 worth of equipment and just what I wear in each game. And then you have to deal with the weather, whether it's snowing, whether it's raining, or it's cold, or it's hot. I did 2 games over the weekend, and it was 93 degrees, which is for up here in Ohio, it's pretty hot and humid, and it was just unbearable. But we had to get through it, and we did it, and we did a good job. And there's a lot of time-consuming factors to umpiring that you gotta appreciate that to love it.
Let me tell you a funny story, guys. Once upon a time, my brother and I were umpiring the same game, and we were arguing with each other. And it's safe to say some of the fans were laughing at us because we couldn't agree on any calls. So I don't know if there's an umpiring story that tops that one, that 2 brothers are arguing with each other during the same game. But we got on the same page. But boy, too bad they didn't have YouTube videos back then. Who knows what we could have made then? But anyways, but with that said,
I know.
Yeah, you almost begin to wonder. So with that said, okay, Mike, you were telling me at one point that you went ahead umpired about 150 to 180 games per year. Now you're doing 3 due to COVID-19. Why don't you elaborate on that?
Yes. Well, every state has been different, and the regulations have changed. A lot of the high school fields, they canceled all their seasons. I lost 40 games right off the bat from March until June. And the teams that are playing now are all-star teams, and they're going around the rules a little bit because the schools are not allowed to have any baseball. But we played at a field that was like 150 years old, out in the middle of nowhere, and these 2 very good teams from Columbus, kids who were all-stars. One pitcher was throwing about 88 miles an hour, and he's a very good player. So the COVID-19, other states, you can't play at all. There isn't any action. There's a whole bunch of states where there's no baseball. And then there's other states, like Indiana, where they've been playing for about a month. So it varies from state to state.
Okay, very interesting. So, all right, let's talk about the fact that you were a journalist for the Montreal Expos. What was that like, being a journalist for them?
Well, I like to describe myself as just a very focused, determined guy, but I look back on this time as some of the best times of my life when I was in the Ottawa newspaper group, besides the Olympics. Being up in Montreal, I was a type of reporter who George, I bet you we were very similar. I covered the offbeat stories. Like in Montreal, Youppi was their mascot, Youppi, and she was it was a she, but nobody knew that. And I went down to interview her, to find her. And it turns out she was a very good-looking woman. She spoke French. She didn't speak much English. And she was drinking Molson beer. And it was, I wrote that story, and they loved it. Nobody had ever done a story on Yuppie before. And I was always looking for that extra story, that, extra little bit of things. Johnny Bench, when he came to Montreal from Cincinnati, and he showed me how he could hold 5 baseballs in his one hand. I still can't believe that. Just amazing.
Well, you know what? That's a good point you make, Mike, because you remember, Scott, we always had the philosophy, you and I, and Tony DeMarco, I'm sure the same, our mentor and friend, to do like Mike said, come up with the offbeat story. I mean, we wrote for a weekly paper in Detroit for a while, the Detroit Monitor, and I couldn't do game stories. I mean, it was a weekly paper.
Right.
So we always had to come up with either interviews or offbeat features, and Scott, you were there right alongside with me when our dear friend Horace Mann would publish our article. So you're darn right, Mike. We subscribe to that theory too, don't we, Scott?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, I came up with all kinds of creative stuff because you're right. That was the only way that we could survive. I got to tell you, since there's a Fort Lauderdale Yankee connection here, Mike, I covered that team for the better part of 2 years. A couple of my favorite stories that I actually wrote were when I wrote a story on Paul Rohde, who was the actual scoreboard operator, and his dedication to the game. And another one, which was really great, was a dancing bear. And this guy used to go ahead and dance between the 7th inning. And let me tell you, my editors loved it. And when I was at the Tampa Tribune, I used to come up with all kinds of stuff there as well. So, you don't have a choice or a prayer to make it in this business if you weren't actually different. In fact, I'll never forget when I worked for a weekly paper down here, how I would go ahead and write a story on a kicker that I knew wouldn't make the team for the Miami Dolphins named Al Del Greco. My editor says, I don't think you should do it. I said, I think we should. I talked to Don Shula about it. I wrote it anyways. And Al Del Greco went on to have a great career in the NFL. Because, again, he worked hard enough to land with another team. So I guess the moral of the story is you have to follow your hunches or you don't really have a prayer in this business.
That's right. That's right. It's the same in 1980 as it is now, even more so now because you have video and Facebook and you have all this electronic stuff. Today on Facebook, for example, a guy named Aaron Nielsen from South Carolina, from his company is called the Harmony Sports Group, and he gets baseball bats. He makes the bats from Maine maple. He finished them off in Cleveland, and his business is in South Carolina, and I'm talking to him like I've known him all my life. And, the fact is, you gotta listen to people, and it's a different world. It's a little bit faster, and it's a lot more pace than there was in 1980.
So, Mike, let me ask you a question. We're talking about the Expo, talking about Montreal Expos. First of all, do you feel that Montreal deserves to get Major League Baseball again?
Well, yeah, I think they deserve it, but they didn't show up last time. That was a long time ago. But it's a very cold city. Their stadium was very cold all the time.
Right.
They did have the greatest food of any stadium I ever went to, but it was very chilly there. Just the weather is very different in Montreal than any other place you could believe. And if they could have an closed stadium, I think is the way to go.
Well, that's the only way they're going to get a team.
You know why they had the best food, guys? Because you had the best chef, Rusty Straub, like Grande Orange.
Oh, wow.
That's right. That's right.
Remember? What a great chef he was. So maybe that's why you had... I'm just kidding, but I couldn't resist.
Oh, that's all right. Oh, that's good. Well, you know what? Mark Littell has gone on record. He's one of our baseball analysts who comes on here a lot. I'm sure you guys are both well aware of him. Well, Mark's a regular on the broadcast. He doesn't think they deserve one, but the only chance you have to get one is they have to have an enclosed stadium or you don't have a prayer there. So, Mike... I know you work for Yankees Magazine, a monthly publication. Tell everybody what it was like to work for them, because I remember many times reading a lot and covering the Fort Lauderdale Yankees and covering spring training for the New York Yankees. It was unbelievable to be able to write for such a magazine.
All right, it was a real blast. I covered the Oneonta Yankees, which was a Class A team. They had John Elway and Pagliarulo and all these guys. They were really good. But the highlight was to go to Fort Lauderdale. And again, as speaking of myself and George, we look for the offbeat story. And, you know, I found all kinds of stuff. George Steinbrenner, Reggie Jackson, Ron Guidry, they were always arguing. There's always a story there. And there wasn't always a lot of reporters around. It was just me. And then the one time I'll never forget was George Steinbrenner sent me a personal letter, and he censored me, and he would not run my column that month. And I had to come up with something real quick. And my point was that I said was Don Mattingly was the next great Yankee hitter. And George wrote, he said, he won't make my team. He said, he's a slow outfielder. He won't make my team. That's what he said. And I've never forgotten that.
Well, you know, another guy who's a big Yankee alumnus was Jim Ogle, and I got to know Jim real well because he was obviously the chairman of the board in Fort Lauderdale. Not a bad thing if you could stay in Fort Lauderdale, oversee the Yankees. So, but tell me some of your favorite George Steinbrenner stories, Mike.
Well, one of them was he was always a gentleman. He's reviewed as a ruffian, but he isn't. He was always smooth. He was having a ferocious argument with Reggie Jackson outside the stadium one time, and I sauntered over there, and I didn't really want to interrupt him, but I was curious. You know, I was a reporter, and all of a sudden he just turned and looked at me, and he smiled, and he said, "Would you hold on just a minute? I'm going to finish this conversation. Is that okay with you?" And I said, "Sure." But he was always like that. He always had something to say to somebody, but he was giving it to Reggie Jackson big time.
You know, one of my people in New York that George, remember when I interviewed Tom Lasorda, but one of the people I came in contact with at 1981 winter meetings was a guy by the name of Phil Pepe of the New York Daily News. And Phil was great. Every time I saw him, he always gave me pointers and helped me with Lasorda interview as well. And then I got to see him every year, and we always rekindled. He's one of the best New York writers that probably a lot of people know about. But did you ever have a chance, Mike, to work with a guy like Phil Pepe?
Well, it's funny you say that because the New York Times was everybody's idol back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And the guy that I looked up to so much was George Vexey, who was a columnist for the Times. And we sat together in 1980 and 81 at the Baseball Hall of Fame games in Cooperstown. And he had all these notes with him. And he said to me one year, he said, "They're going to bring in this guy late in the game, the Red Sox are, and he's got some talent and he's got some size to him. You watch out for this guy. If he stays healthy, he could be pretty good in the major leagues." And it was Roger Clemens.
Oh, God.
Okay. And then another time, George was always about, as a reporter, he was representing the Times, and I was representing the Daily Star, and we're sitting next to each other, and we're not supposed to be cheerleaders, and we were good about that. But then the Pittsburgh Pirates came to Cooperstown, and Willie Stargell, it was like something out of a Babe Ruth movie or Lou Gehrig. He limped up to the plate. He was going to pinch hit, and he hit a monstrous home run out of the park completely. And I turned around, and George was standing up. And he was so excited, and so was I. And we couldn't help ourselves because it was something to see Willie Stargell hit that home run.
That's great. That's wonderful.
So, Mike,
one of the greatest home runs that I saw on television, but not in person, I was a fool back in 1971. A friend of mine, Danny, was able to obtain box seats down the right field line for the Tigers hosting the 1971 All-Star Game. That's when Reggie Jackson hit this mammoth home run. He hit the right field light tower. You remember, Scott?
Oh, yeah.
And they thought that the home run would have been the longest in Tiger Stadium history. But no, I said, Dan, I don't have the money right now. I think I'll pass on that. Oh, my gosh. I wish I wouldn't have done that because in 71 there were so many All-Stars. Doc Ellis and just so many guys there at the All-Star game in 71, Reggie Jackson included. And basically that was one of my highlights when I was a kid growing up, was at least being able to watch that game on television.
Yeah, me too. I remember as if it were yesterday, a lot of yesterdays ago. Mike, you had a fascinating story about Pete Rose when he grabbed your girlfriend. This was pretty entertaining. You got to let everybody know about this one.
Well, Pete Rose is a character, and for the record, I think he should be in the Baseball Hall of Fame, but I don't like him. I never have liked him, and it's probably because my girlfriend at the time was Lois. She was the editor of the paper, and they posed for a picture, and I was taking their picture, and Pete Rose started grabbing her. And I never forget that. And I didn't think that was very appropriate at the time, and I still don't think it's appropriate.
Not at all. Not at all. And that's kind of behavior that, got that and other, of course, has gotten Pete in trouble over the years. But I agree with you guys. I think he should be in the Hall of Fame. I think Roger Clemens should be in the Hall of Fame. I know that the steroids era, but I'm sorry, Bud Selig, kind of looked the other way during a lot of that era. So you can't blame the players that have denied Sammy Sosa and Mark McGwire and Lou Bonds is still waiting his turn. And I just think that in the case of Roger Clemens is another one, but it's unfortunate that some people had to do things like that, but it doesn't still take the glamour away from those great athletes. And you're right, it's like the reunion, like you said, Mike, when guys come back. I remember when George Kell and Al Kaline, and Scott, you remember this, they used to be the broadcasters for the Tigers.
Right.
And they would rotate. I know George would say on the air, he'd say, well, Al, you're going to be going to Cooperstown next week. I'll be staying here, and then so-and-so will be filling in for you. And then the following year, they had somebody fill in, and Kaline stayed in Detroit while Kell went to the Cooperstown. And I remember just how much they took so much delight in that alternating, at least, every other year as they were preoccupied doing broadcasts, because they look forward to, like you said, this great reunion of all those baseball greats.
The thing with Al Kaline, I just watched it just yesterday, his speech at the Baseball Hall of Fame of 1980, and something he said really resonated strongly with me. He said it all starts at the beginning, and everybody who helped him, he thanked. He didn't brag about himself or talk about his stats. He talked about the people that helped him with his swing and his start. And I'd like to say I think it all started with me in 1967 with my father, and he's still alive, and he lives in Florida now. He's 90 years old, and he was my coach, and he taught me how to play. He was up on me, and he was a real good coach and a real good guy to everybody else who loved him. His son kind of hated him at the time because he was tough on me, but everything starts with him, and I'd like to thank him for that.
Well, so with that said, okay, we talk about Al Kaline, but one of my heroes is Mickey Lolich. Do you guys feel that Mickey Lolich belongs in the Hall of Fame?
I'll say no.
No, I think you could make a case for him, but he is borderline. I'll admit that. He didn't have the amount of wins, and the amount of recognition. I know he won the MVP for the World Series, but, and his strikeout rates were just unbelievable for a left-hander. But yeah, he's a borderline guy, I think, Scott and Mike.
What about complete games? They mattered then. Now you'll be lucky to get 200 and some odd complete games for 5 years with these teams. The way everything's so specialized. Mickey Lolich was an innings eater.
What's a complete game? Explain that to me.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Thanks for making my point. So, that to me is just what I've always often wondered. And I don't care. I mean, obviously he's not in the Hall of Fame, so a lot of people feel the same way you. I feel Mickey Lolich belongs in the Hall of Fame, and he doesn't get the respect. Mickey Lolich has something common with Rodney Dangerfield. You don't get any respect, so go figure. So,
hey.
But with that said, okay, let's talk about, Phil Rizzuto. You had an interesting story about Phil Rizzuto. Mike, go ahead. Tell us about it.
You don't do this business to be famous, okay? Some people, it works out, they get famous. But I could have been famous for something that happened in 1981. I was covering spring training in Fort Lauderdale, and I went to go back in the press box, and out the press box came out this little short man real quick. He had to go to the bathroom real quick, and he bumped into my ex-wife, and he almost went over the railing, and he would have died if he went down on the field. And I grabbed him by the arm, and I saved him. So that's what I'm famous for.
Oh, my gosh. Wow.
Well, You know, it's amazing. One of the stadiums I've always liked, and George, it's too bad you never got there. You went to Pompano, but you never made it. Fort Lauderdale Stadium, to me, had an enormous amount of memories, that's for sure. And I know that you can certainly relate to that, right, Mike?
Yes, I can. Yeah. Is that stadium still there?
No, actually, what happened was I actually did a video there with my wife about 10 days ago, and they tore it down. It's now a soccer training facility, and Lockhart Stadium was torn down for David Beckham's new MLS team. I think it's called Inter Miami. So now let's talk about MLB restarting COVID-19. I know they reached an agreement to play 60 games, but are we really going to see a season?
Well, go ahead. You go, George.
Well, I mean, it looks like it's finally the commissioner has the authority to mandate it. So the last I heard, they were waiting for the players to review that long document that came out by the commissioner's office. And but they're not going to expand the playoffs, which I was hoping they might. But I heard that they still will do the universal designated hitter for 2020, if I'm not mistaken. And then are they? I don't understand this. Are they going back to that idea of playing in a region, or is it going to be strictly the same divisions that we are used to?
I haven't heard that.
Because remember that one idea was the region.
Yeah, where they broke them down into 3 regions. Yeah. I haven't heard anything to that effect. Don't know.
Yeah, I guess that's probably not part of this deal then. So it's been a long time coming, but I feel for the fans. I feel for the workers that are out of jobs. Everybody from the parking lot attendants to the concession workers and the broadcasters and the writers too, and the technicians that cover the games. And I don't like the way that got into a petty squabbling about money between the players and the owners. I thought that left a bad taste in my mouth. You, Mike?
Yes, I agree with that, but I think the answer is going to be what just happened in Dunedin with that team, and with the Phillies in Clearwater. They have 8 or 9 or 10 players that came down with COVID-19. And I think, speaking as an umpire, that's what's happening, is that people are going to be exposed so much, and they're going to be, on planes and on locker rooms, and there's going to be people coming down with it, and that's it. They'll close the season down for good then.
I think so too. I'm kind of in agreement with you on that, Mike. Even though there's an agreement to save face, there's no agreement. It was a mandate by Rob Manfred. I think the whole thing has been an absolute embarrassment how you can argue with all that money and yet realize a lot of people are out of money, unemployed and so forth. It's just an absolute joke. It really, really, really is. Now, I know, Mike, you wanted to talk about the fact that you worked in newspapers from 1978 to 1988, and you wanted to address that, and then you became a PR guy talking about higher education. And in your book, you mentioned Howard Taub. Why don't you go into more details on that?
Yeah, Howard Taub's a good friend of mine. I met him last summer. He came down to my house. We're friends. We're personal friends now. And he has a lot of experience in baseball, too. He's coached, and he's been an umpire. But he was at Cooperstown with me last year, and I took him around to the Otesaga Hotel, which is a gigantic hotel. It's about 200 years old. And I took him around to all the showrooms and the places where we went in 1980 through 84. And he was in awe, and he just couldn't get enough of it. And, I told him about my parents came with me in 1980, and the guy next to me turned to us at lunch and he said, "Can we have some salt, please?" And my father handed him the salt, and he said, "Yes, sir." And he said, "Mike, who is that?" Well, that was Al Kaline, who asked for the salt. And then before that, he went through the line for the buffet, and they had crab meat and lobster and all this fancy food. And he said, "Man, that's good." And I was talking to this guy up there the whole time, and he was a real short guy, and he really talked my ear off. He's a nice guy. He's that guy sitting right over there, and he pointed, and that was Warren Spahn.
Yeah, you talk about the Lake Otsego Inn, where they have conference rooms and interview people. I've been to Cooperstown. I love Lake Otsego. And I can't wait to take my wife to Cooperstown. Cooperstown, folks, is a must bucket list to do. Thankfully, I've been there a few times, as I alluded at the top of the broadcast. But, why don't you educate George Eichorn what Cooperstown is like, Mike?
Yeah, they never there.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, No, I was just going to say, it's on my bucket list, too, so I definitely got to get there before the old man kicks the bucket.
Yeah, well, ironically, I've never been to Canton, Ohio for the NFL.
You can stand in one place. You can stand in one place, and you can look down, and you see Doubleday Field with all those famous people that played there and covered there. And then you look down to the left, and you see the Hall of Fame, and you think about all the thousands of people that have come there. And there's a flagpole right in the middle. And I love standing right there and have my picture taken or take pictures of other people. It's an amazing place. It's very small. It's very close-knit. And part of my book, I put in a chapter about the 1981 Cooperstown High School baseball team. And that coach was really nice. He let me cover the games from inside the locker, the dugout, which is really unusual. I'm going to go up there on a book tour from July 13th to the 15th. I'm going to see Mark Rathbun, the old coach. He's still alive and kicking. And I'm going to stop in and see a lot of people. I got this book signing at the Otasaga Hotel. It'll be an old home day. It'll be a coming home, and it'd be great for me to be there, and I hope to see a lot of people up there.
Well, I got to tell you this. George knows it better than anybody. Tim Mead, who's a president, is a very good friend of mine. He's going to come on the show at some point down the road. We can get a time. Tim and I go back many years, back to when he was with the Angels, dating back to the 80s. He said, more than happy to come on. All I got to do is give him a call, and he'll be on. So I'm just trying to find the right time to bring him on, and you know, that's pretty neat. So I know you've been living in Ohio, Mike, since 1986. What's it been like living in the Midwest?
Well, Columbus is a fast-growing city. It's fun being around there. There's all kinds of concerts. Garth Brooks have been to every concert they have in there, and it's a vibrant city. It's a liberal city, and they're on the way to going on good unless they change their name to John Glenn or something else right now. It's a turbulent time we're living in right now.
Yeah, the only time I was at Columbus, spent some time there, George, you remember when I covered the Red Wings and the Columbus Blue Jackets over at the Nationwide Arena. I enjoyed it. It was a pretty cool place, that stadium. It really is.
Yeah, the Blue Jackets are great. They're great.
So, all right, well, we got...
Karen Davis, former Red Wings PR director. Of course, she's very involved with the Blue Jackets in the arena there, Karen Davis, yeah.
Really?
But, yeah, we got to make sure that everybody knows about Mike's book, Scott. We got to get this book out there for everybody to see.
Getting that right now, George. Okay, with that said, George, great lead-in like it was always back in the old days. So nothing like having my partner bringing it up again. Thanks, George. With that said, Mike, you have a book to talk about? Let's talk about the Umpire's Bunkhouse. Why should anybody buy this book, and what is it that they can benefit by it?
Yeah, it's a humorous book, but it's a serious book. It looks at the guys who wear the blue, some of the women wearing the blue too, and it's little stories, little anecdotes about all these guys. I stay in the bunkhouse with no air conditioning and no heat. This book is called The Umpire's Bunkhouse, Baseball Stories from Cooperstown. You can get it on Amazon or Barnes & Noble or from Outskirts Press, my publisher in Colorado. You can get it there too. So that's the easiest way to do it. And it talks about the issues of baseball right now. It talks about Mike Trout is one of the premier people who played in this tournament. And it's a great tournament, great competition. And it's something that everybody wants to experience this year, though they canceled out because of COVID-19.
Are there any certain things that stand out where you want to go out there and throw a teaser about what they have when they buy this book and look into it? Or are you going to just say, I'll leave a little bit out there for you guys to go out there and buy it?
Yeah, and I'll read you one paragraph. The same is true for the incredible, beautiful sport of baseball. Men and an expanding number of women have the intestinal fortitude to crouch down, unflinching, behind home plate, wearing an umpiring mask. They usually wear blue. Who are those guys in blue? Who are they really? Okay, that's how I start the book up.
Excellent.
All right,
excellent.
Well, with that said, okay.
Yeah,
go ahead, George.
Yeah.
No, go ahead.
No, that being said, I think Scott has mentioned on the air before, too, and Mike, I'm proud author of a book called Detroit's Sports Broadcasters on the Air. It's part of the Images of Sports series by Arcadia Publishing, and my book came out, several years ago, but it's still very pertinent. It's got guys, I'll tell you what, Al Kaline's in there because Al was a former Tiger announcer. Our friend Ernie Harwell's in there, and from the Lions, we've got the great Van Patrick and Bob Reynolds I mentioned, and from the Pistons, of course, George Blaha, Red Wings, of course, Bruce Martin, Bud Lynch, Ken Kell, and So, yeah, my book is kind of a walk down memory lane if you like to learn about Detroit sports broadcasters in the state of Michigan. And it's still available out there as well. You can get it on Amazon also, Detroit's Sports Broadcasters on the Air, it's called.
Yeah, I should point out that I'm also in there with Jimmy Connors and Muhammad Ali. George actually found a page for me in there, so it's good stuff. So, hey, why not, man? To promote the book, and I was going to say, the closest thing I've been to a part of the book is that one. So it's good that we have two books on here that tell their own meaning in lots of different ways, and it, to me, is just phenomenal stuff. Anything else you want to add about the book, Mike?
No, there's a lot of people reading now. That's really good. I teach school sometimes, too. I substitute teach school, and it's amazing how people weren't reading anymore. But this COVID-19 has caused people to read a lot more. There's some great books out there. George's book is a really good one. I looked at it online. My book, it's interesting. I had a woman from Florida say, I'm not a sports fan. I don't know anything about sports, but I read every page of your book, and it told me about you and about Cooperstown and about history of America. A lot of people talking about the country. Where are we going right now? So it's a timely read.
Yeah, and Mike obviously got a good steady diet of me, because if he did what I know he did, he went to SouthFloridaTribune.com, right, Mike?
That's right. That's right.
All right, so with that said, what we're going to do now is, since we're at the end of the broadcast, we'll lead off with you, Mike. Why don't you let everybody know how they can get a hold of you, and then George follows, and then I'll wrap it up.
Right. I'll be glad to sign books for invitation. I do that. I'm at book signings around the country. I'm going to be in Cooperstown coming up the 13th to the 15th. I hope to go to Oneonta and to Burlington, Vermont, and then Plattsburgh, New York later on. And then the best way to reach me is to go to my publisher, outskirtspress.com, and ask for Mike Brown and ask for information, and they can get in touch with me, and I can help out. I can give you a signed book. I can arrange for all kinds of things. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. I should point one thing about Pete Rose while it's come to my mind. I think one of the things that hurt Pete Rose getting in the Hall of Fame was he kept having book signings during the Hall of Fame proceedings, and obviously not coming forward a little bit, hiding, and then ultimately admitting that he gambled did not help his case either. So, you don't show up to Hall of Fame at all, and Bud Selig's a hard-nosed individual. He won't put up with it. So, again, gambling is prohibited against it, and the way he covered it up and all the moves he made thereafter didn't help his cause. I just thought I'd get that in. All right, George, Eichorn, my Sports Exchange co-host for longer than the millennials, okay? Why don't you go ahead and let everybody know your contact information? Am I showing the age card? Yeah. Probably a little bit. 40 years
all right.
of knowing you?
Yeah, Detroit Sports Broadcasters on the Air. Best way to obtain it is to go to either Amazon.com or ArcadiaPublishing.com. Arcadia, ARCADIA, Publishing.com. They have a whole bunch of books. In fact, I also want to put a plug in for some other baseball books that you'll love from Arcadia. In addition to what I wrote, they also, Mike, you'll love this. They've got, I know, books about Cooperstown, too, that other authors have come up with. And also, I'll be happy to sign it. The only problem is I'm only in Detroit, so we'd have to get the book, or you could order it through me. My email is Eichorn, GEICHORN @yahoo.com.
Very good. All right, and to get a hold of us, you can follow me at Twitter at Tribune South. That's the @ Tribune South. Since we've talked about hockey a little bit, I'll give you a hat trick of South Florida Tribunes. We'll lead it off here, since that's a baseball term, on Facebook. You can follow us on Facebook, like us, and you'll get all the updates on Facebook, South Florida Tribune. Instagram, South Florida Tribune gets it done. I'm working on a YouTube channel. That's South Florida Tribune. I've been doing a lot more videos lately, and one of the things I've actually come up recently with is Serene Sunday. Looking forward to building that up as well. Our website, as I mentioned, www.southfloridatribune.com. Have good content and information as well. Our email is southfloridatribune@gmail.com. You can find me on LinkedIn at Scott Morganroth. And you are listening to the Sports Exchange WSAN Network. You can find this broadcast as well on SouthFloridaTribune.com or wherever you get your podcast. So, anything else you guys want to add before we close out the broadcast?
No, this is Mike, and it's a friendly time, but it's a good time. It's a difficult time, but we'll get through it. And talking sports tonight's been great. I appreciate it very much.
George, any final thoughts?
Same here. We hope baseball can resume very soon. I can't wait to see the umpires. I know there's a few new ones this year. Mike, we've had some retirements. We didn't even talk about that. But, again, I applaud the men in blue, including yourself, sir, for all the great umpiring you've done over your lifetime.
Well,
thank you.
Well, I got to tell you, guys, it's been a privilege having you both on the air, and that wraps up this edition of the Sports Exchange. George Eichorn will be coming on very frequently. I'm looking forward to having my old partner on all the time, because I'll tell you what, every time we did a broadcast, we certainly, I know him, he knows me, and again, you know what, it's always great to be able to have you on, George and Mike. It's certainly been a privilege, and I'm glad that Facebook gave us the opportunity to come in contact. So on behalf of Mike Brown and George Eichorn, my name is Scott Morganroth, the Motor City Man Mouth, wishing you a good evening and hope you enjoyed the broadcast. Good night, everybody.